For those who really, really, really want to know, the translation is Senatus Populusque Romanus.
Yeah. I know, Metatron, stop it. Metatron, we hate you. Not everyone needs to know Latin. I get it, but if he's presenting the Latin at this point, wouldn't it be better from an educational perspective to be pedantic, like me? Hey, noble ones. So for the last few uploads, we've been checking the channel history hit. Now, as you know, sometimes I like this channel, other times I absolutely don't. So I think it really depends on who the expert is, right? Now, for today, we are going back to ancient Rome, and we're looking at this specific video from 7 months ago. What do we know about ancient Rome? Actually, wrong title. The question is, what have the Romans ever done for us? That's the question. Anyways, Dr. Simon Elliot. Yeah, I'm familiar with him. Sometimes I like him, sometimes I don't. So today it's going to be a little bit of a dice roll, I suppose. But I also imagine people could say the same about me. So at the end of the day, hey, it is what it is. At least, I'll be honest about it. And I came prepared. We've got a little Roman imperial helmet, Gallic type H, because for the glory of Rome. You muppet. Let's go. By the way, when I say you muppet, I'm actually referring to you. I wasn't disrespecting Mr. Elliot. I would say Dr. Muppet. I mean, you've got to, For the Empire.
My name is Dr. Simon Elliot, FSA. I'm an archaeologist, historian and broadcaster. And today I'll be answering Google's most popular questions about the Roman Republic.
Oh, Republic specifically. Interesting.
First question. When was the Roman Republic? So when we talk about the world of Rome, we talk about 3 specific phases.
Right.
The Republic, and then 2 phases of empire, which are the Principate and the Dominate.
Interesting that he would say Principate, because of course, if you're reading it in Latin, it's Principatus. But I thought in English it would be Principate. That's how I have always pronounced it. So this feels like a little bit, I'm pedantic like that, so just so you know. But I'm not actually attacking him because he's native. I'm not. I'm wondering if that's on purpose to create a little bit of a mix pronunciation from the expert, So kind of everything he does, I'm going to be like, oh, is that something I can learn? Because I would say the Principate and the Dominate. I never heard it called the Principate. Because it feels like half Latin, half English, doesn't it?
And our focus here is on the Republic, the first third. This lasts from 509 BC, when the Roman Senate overthrew Tarquin the Proud, the last Roman king, all the way through to 27 BC, when the Senate declare Augustus, or rather Octavian, as Augustus, the first emperor.
Yeah, that's a beautiful bronze.
Next question. Who ruled the Roman Republic? Roman society was very, very stratified. So at the very bottom you had slaves, and then you had freed men who had formerly been slaves, and then you had free men who had never been slaves, and then above that you have 3 classes.
I think in this case the editor shouldn't have put freed men, because freed men are the ones that he just mentioned, the former slaves. So on top of that you've got free men, so they have always been free, not freed in that case. But it's not a mistake by the expert, he said it correctly, just the editor.
Classes of aristocrats. You have curials, who are low-level aristocrats, leading merchants, military men. You have the equestrians, the knights, and then finally at the very top you have the Senate. Of that, only the Senate and the senators were patricians. Everybody else were plebs. From the Senate, you have 2 individuals who are voted each year to be the leading men of Rome to run the Roman Republic, and they're the consuls.
Yeah.
How healthy were people in the Roman?
Okay, to add on that, since he's already moving on to the next question, of course, because he doesn't have like infinite time. He's not like me. I have a lot of time in my hands. In fact, I have a Commodore 64, Nintendo 64, got an original Super Nintendo here. Will you look at that? Yeah. But yeah, just to add, first, Rome was not the only place that had a senate. In fact, even Carthage had a senate, interestingly enough. They were organized in a very similar way. And interestingly enough, I really don't think it's a random succession of events that the 2 very similar massive powers of the Mediterranean ended up clashing into this literal clash of titans. So there is that. They were very similar from that point of view. And even when it comes to the organization of the armies, because they were both very professional, with both generals and armored troops and all of that. Secondly, talking about the consuls, isn't it crazy that the leaders of this period, and not just this period because this is something that applies to the medieval period as well, but isn't it crazy the consuls led armies? Literally. So could you imagine a modern politician like a president who actually goes on a battlefield leading on top of a horse in armor? So we're maybe eating with the soldiers. We know emperors even did that, both to go to war with the soldiers and eat with them the same food that they were eating, probably for morale. At least the sources tell us that. And a similar thing happened with princes, with kings. It's like, I wonder when exactly, we'll have to maybe make a dedicated video as to when leaders stopped going to war and just sent the young men to die in their place. Because that's not the case for classical antiquity. These men were very brave.
What did SPQR stand for? It's very
And let's see how he's going to pronounce it. No, okay, I'm not going to nitpick. I'm just going to say it afterwards, but I'm not going to nitpick. It's fine. He's English.
straightforward. It's basically the Senate and the people of Rome. So in the Roman Republic,
Oh, you didn't
things
say
were
it.
done on behalf of the Senate and the people of Rome.
I'll say it in a minute.
And in the Roman Empire, when you have an emperor, the conceit is the emperor, as the leading man of the world of Rome, was still doing things for the Senate and the people of Rome, SPQR, but he was lying because he was an emperor. But certainly in the case of the Roman Republic, it was absolutely true. Things were carried out in the name of the Senate and the people of Rome. For those who really, really, really want to know, the translation is Senatus Populusque Romanus.
Yeah, I know. Metatron, stop it. Metatron, we hate you. Not everyone needs to know Latin. I get it, but if he's presenting the Latin at this point, wouldn't it be better from an educational perspective to be pedantic, like me? But in all seriousness, I'm just going to say it for those who like Latin and just want to know, but it would be Senatus Populusque Romanus. So for the phonemic vowel length, Senatus, so the A is long, Senatus, retracted S, Populusque. That's kind of short because populus is people, populus is a type of tree, so Populusque Romanus. Both the O and the A are long. All right, I did it. I said it. Hate me all you want now.
How healthy were people in the Roman Republic? That is an absolutely fantastic question.
And very broad.
So the average lifespan for somebody living in the Roman world, the average lifespan was about 35 years. However, you have to take into account that incorporates horrendous levels of infant mortality.
Yeah.
But even then, most people had a much shorter lifespan than they would in the world in which we live today. Because you were living in an age before modern medicine when they themselves didn't have a real understanding of especially social illnesses which are sort of transmitted between other human beings, especially in the urban environment. And the Romans also, by the way, had an amazing transport network which made it very easy for social illnesses to travel throughout the empire as well. So you have plague event after plague event after plague event. And because the Romans didn't understand this, they basically thought it was associated with magic. And the way that they dealt with it was also through magic. So they would have amulets, which they thought would protect you from a social illness. Believe that an individual...
That one is a bulla. That is something you give to a Roman male child, like a Roman boy. That's what they would wear, and then it would look like a little moon for little girls. In fact, it's a matter of protection, social protection, and underlining this boy is the child of a citizen, so don't touch him, or we'll go really down on you harshly from a legal perspective. It has legislative connotations. Also, this idea of magic. I mean, there are a few things I want to say, but I want to let him finish first.
So I, looking at an individual in front of me, can actually, through the evil eye, make them ill or ill-favoured or unlucky. So to counter that, what you do is you have your own eyes as countermeasures fighting back, and that is why you very often find on the aegis of a Roman suit of armour, a muscle cuirass, a Medusa head, because the Medusa's got snakes with loads of eyes. That's where when you go around Pompei or Ostyrantica, you can find wall paintings or mosaics featuring peacocks, because peacocks have got eyes on their feathers. It's all about countering the evil eye.
Okay, so that was a very good point, very interesting, in fact, because of course he knows what he's talking about, but I still take a little bit of an issue, in my humble opinion, of course. He's the expert, so take whatever I say with a pinch of salt. I'm just using, reason and logic, and a little bit my understanding of the sources to kind of make sense of what he said, because this idea that he said, well, they didn't have modern medicine, of course, but neither did we in the industrial age. And if anything, I think when it comes to overpopulation of cities, extra crowded cities because of mechanization and industrial production, I would say that England, for example, during the industrial age had a much worse life expectancy, hygienic conditions, and very ease of spread of disease than they did in ancient Rome. So when we say modern, we gotta have to, like, you literally, if you compare it to contemporary society right now, but when you compare the sort of health and life expectancy of the Roman period, classical antiquity, even to recent, still modern era, but during the Industrial Revolution, then yeah, I would rather live in Rome. Also, when it comes to this idea of magic, well, I don't think that that's a good representation of Rome as a whole. And what I mean by that, the way I'm going to defend it, is the following. Did they have superstitious people? Yes. Do we not have them? We do. We absolutely do, superstitious people even today. But there were also people that were very learned and tried to figure out a causal link that was absolutely physical in connection to the sort of like plagues, and we can read that in the sources. I'm sure he's familiar with it. And then, of course, there are religious connotations. So there were people that thought that it was the gods that sent as a form of punishment certain illnesses, and therefore, if you live a life in accordance to what the gods want, that might help ward off some of these illnesses. But once again, there are plenty of people that still believe this in our day and age. So, was there a highest degree of superstition, religious connotation to illnesses and sickness, as opposed to an attempt at find physical explanations for these things? It really depends. I mean, probably in comparison to today. But then again, I think the issue that I take here is that it makes it sound like, oh, the Romans just believed in magic and superstition. But in reality, no, we have plenty of situations where Romans tried to find a physical connotation to diseases, all the way up to even telling us to not make a homestead near a swamp because there are small invisible creatures to the eye that can enter your body and make you ill. That's not a superstition. That's a pretty ingenious understanding, if you ask me.
So basically the Romans didn't have a very good understanding of social illness, and therefore, compared to us, very unhealthy. One final point most people don't realise is also Romans suffered greatly from eye infections. We know this from the huge number of eye ointment pots which have been found on archaeological sites. The reason being, of course, that it's a very dusty environment, and actually if you're in the built environment, an urban setting, it's very noxious with open fires and things like that. So not a healthy place to live.
Yeah, also one more thing I wanted to say when it comes to the age, so average age, I appreciated that he repeated the word average, but I wish he would have explained it a bit more. Because when he says that the average Roman would live up to age 35, and then he did mention that, yes, that includes infant mortality, but then you have to underline that what that means is that there were still plenty of Romans that lived up to age 60, 70, and even older than that. It doesn't mean that when you are born in ancient Rome or in classical antiquity, then, oh gosh, you're lucky if you make it to age 35, but most people will die. No, precisely because we're introducing the factor, the variable of infant mortality. That means that the overall average age will be skewed tremendously because of that. But as long as you survive as an infant, then your chances of actually living into an old age are not that bad. It's just that quite a few infants would die, particularly in comparison to today, before they could even reach adulthood or even teenage years. That is massively important to underline. Otherwise, people will just go home with this idea, oh my gosh, most Romans died at age 35. That's absolutely not the case. It is an average, but people don't understand averages. Also, that average is much influenced by what sort of social status you had. The wealthier the class, the more upper class you were, the better the sort of nutrition you could have, and therefore the higher would be the chances of you avoiding death in infant mortality, which once again would tremendously increase your chances of survival. So several factors here that need to be underlined for precision.
How big was the Roman Republic? That is a very good question, because it's like a chronological layer cake. So we begin at 509 BC with the foundation of the Roman Republic. When at that time, Rome was basically, when Rome was one of the dominant cities in Latium, which is on the central west coast of the main peninsula of Italy, around where the River Tiber is. And Rome was just one of the dominant cities there. In actual fact, the last Roman king actually was an Etrusco-Roman king, because at that point, that Latium and the world of Rome was dominated by the Etruscans,
This actually happens a lot. When you look at the Roman kingdom and even the early republic, there is a lot of exchange between the Etruscans and the Romans, both in terms of what lineage the royalty would belong to, but also when it comes to this village is now Roman, but then wait a few generations and now it's in the hands of the Etruscans, and then wait a few other generations and the Romans pick it back up. And so of course you can imagine there was a certain intermingling of both culture, population, census, if you will. But most importantly, and this is a very interesting fun fact, for the Greeks, at least when it comes to the early republic, they would get confused between Romans and Etruscans. This is a very strong indicator of how connected these people were, to the point that early Greek reports of the Romans called them just another type of Etruscans, until Rome actually completely dominates. But a lot of metallurgy as well that the Romans used was based or copied onto Etruscan metallurgical techniques. So very, very connected, at least at the beginning.
Who lived to their north in Etruria, modern Tuscany. So it's a very small area. And it's over a period of time that Republican Rome, through martial success, and by the way, they didn't always win, but when they lost, they learned from it and came back the better. They kept coming back and coming back. So you have a series of wars at the end of which they're dominating Italy, and then they're dominating Sicily. Then they find themselves in conflict with the Hellenistic world, and then they start dominating the Balkans and then are dragged into the Near East and the Levant. Around this period also end up fighting a series of wars, the Punic Wars against Carthaginians in the Western Mediterranean as well, and then that drags them through southern Gaul, southern France, and then Spain, North Africa. So you begin with this little kernel, tiny sort of place, the small growing city in Latium in 509 BC, and then over hundreds of years, gradually through this chronological layer cake, the Roman Republic gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. By the time Octavian, as Augustus is declared the first emperor in 27 BC, the Roman Republic is actually growing to this vast area where it's covering huge tracts of land. So from that point, you're looking at Gaul after Caesar's conquests, Spain after the defeat of the Carthaginians in the Punic Wars, and later the Spaniards, North Africa, Egypt, the Near East, Anatolia, and the Balkans as well. So from small beginnings to a huge empire at the beginning of the empire.
True, correct.
How did the Roman Republic expand? Well, the Roman Republic expanded through military conquest, pure and simple. Fighting a series of campaigns over hundreds of years against people across their known world. The key crucial engagements would have been against the Carthaginians in the Western Mediterranean, the Hellenistic kingdoms in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Gauls and the Germans in Gaul. Remember, Caesar also very briefly, in fact,
and Britannia
came to Britain in 55 and 54 BC, and then against the Numidians in North Africa as well. So through military conquest. Next question.
Excellent.
Did the Roman Republic have gladiators?
Yes.
Absolutely, the Roman Republic did have gladiators. So the use of gladiators originated in the Republican Roman world, and in actual fact it originated almost certainly in Etruria, so the region of modern Tuscany, where it was associated originally with funeral games for a senior individual who died in the society.
Just want to, for precision, because it's the second time, I don't want to be pedantic, but it's the second time that he says that Etruria would be Tuscany. It's Tuscany and a few other surrounding regions. It's a little larger than Tuscany.
So you'd have gladiatorial combats as a way of celebrating their life and to entertain the funeral crowds. The Romans, being very sanguineous and bloody in their own right and liking a good fight, actually pinched the idea.
Everyone did.
They were very good at pinching other people's ideas, and then it became a central focus and feature of Roman public life, ultimately in amphitheatres like the enormous Colosseum in Rome.
Yes, one thing on the idea of, the Romans were bloodthirsty, they liked blood, they liked fight. Well, everyone, I think all humans do. We watch MMA, and I understand that like wrestling is somewhat staged, of course, but still, I mean, those wrestlers can absolutely throw people. Like, it's not like they can't fight. And regardless, what we appreciate of wrestling, whether it be professional wrestling, whether it be staged or not, is the physical, is when they pretend to be hurt. Like, people like fighting, we like boxing, we like martial arts, and once again, when you look some fights of MMA, I don't think we are in any position, not that he's doing it, but I'm saying often this is presented, so I do want to kind of approach it. I don't think we are in any position to say, well, the Romans liked blood and they liked fighting and they liked violence, but we are so much more civilized. No, we're not. We are really not. I mean, some of those crazy fights of MMA when they completely destroy each other's face, and I'm someone who watches MMA, but at least I admit it. I like a good fight. The Romans liked a good fight. Same. Not to mention gladiatorial games weren't as deadly. Some people died occasionally, but they weren't as deadly as people make them to be.
Who were the Roman Republic's biggest rivals?
There we go, back.
The Roman Republic's biggest rivals, in order, I'll give you the top three in my opinion. The Roman Republic's biggest rival was Carthage.
It's Carthage,
against whom the Romans fought three very, very, very bloody, serious conflicts, First, Second and Third Punic Wars.
Yeah.
Next, I would say any combination of the Hellenistic kingdoms in the Eastern Mediterranean, whether this is Macedonia, whether this is the Seleucid Kingdom, whether this is Ptolemaic Egypt. And then finally, probably you're looking at the Gauls, because Caesar, although he actually did conquer Gaul in probably around 6 years, he found it very difficult. And
yeah, I was thinking about that. I don't know, maybe I would have put the Gauls at number 2, but then again, he did say in his opinion, so it's absolutely fine.
Actually kept having to go back to territory he'd already conquered, because the Gauls who had acquiesced to Roman rule then rebelled. So in that order, Carthaginians, Hellenistic kingdoms, the Gauls.
And also, you know, the Germans were a problem, but Rome used its very famous strategy, which is called divide et impera in Latin, so divide and conquer, which really, really worked marvelously with the Germans. I think if the early Germanic tribes would have been united, they would absolutely have been a formidable foe, not as formidable as Carthage. He is absolutely right to put Carthage as number 1, particularly when looking at the Roman Republic. Also because if you did want to make like an episode of speculative history, it would be very interesting to see what if Carthage had won. What if Hannibal won the Battle of Zama, Scipio Africanus was defeated, and Rome fell? And what if it was Rome that got plundered and razed rather than Carthage? Again, no salt involved, that's a myth, the salting of Carthage. Still, divide et impera worked marvelously because the clans were divided, the Romans got them to fight against each other, and then, yeah, good luck with a single bunch of tribes to try and stop the might of the Roman Republic Empire.
What was the triumvirate?
Yeah.
The triumvirate, or the most important triumvirate, was in the middle of the 50s BC, which was formed by the three big men of Rome at the time. So you have the leading Optimates, who's Pompei. You have the leading Populares, Caesar, who's in the middle of his conquest of Gaul at the time. And then you have the richest man in the Roman world, Crassus. And these form this pact within the Senate that they won't oppose each other's legislation.
Pompey! It's a reference to another video, link in the description. Pompei.
And they'll support each other, and it brings a degree of political stability into the late Republican Roman world, which for a time actually stabilised things, but ultimately, of course, because Caesar became so successful in conquering Gaul, it set him against his great rival Pompey, and then ultimately you end up with the Roman civil wars, which end up with Augustus being the last man standing as Octavian and the first emperor. So the triumvirate was this three individuals who worked together for Roman stability in the middle of the 50s BC. Moving on to the next question. What were the Punic Wars? The Punic Wars were the three conflicts which the Roman Republic fought against the Carthaginians. The best known is the Second Punic War, because it's in the Second Punic War we have this great military figure, Hannibal, who is one of the greatest opponents as an individual that the Roman Republic, or even later Empire, ever faced.
I believe that statue is not considered to be representative of Hannibal anymore, used to be.
And Hannibal, in actual fact, invaded Italy and then fought three victorious battles against Republican Romans, the Battle of the Trebia, the Battle of Lake Trasimene, and then the Battle of Cana. And Cana was a catastrophic defeat for the Roman Republic.
I didn't know it was pronounced like that in English. I always say cannae, but then again, I'm reading it in Latin. Do you pronounce it this way? Let me know if you're native. Let me know in the comments below.
They lost thousands and thousands and thousands of troops. But it's very insightful here, because in that defeat you can see a real nugget about why the Roman Republic and later Empire was so successful in the Romans being so good at learning from the mistakes, number one. So they lost this battle, but they picked up lots of ideas from the Carthaginians. Number two, though...
Yeah, the Carthaginian blueprints. See this part here. I wish you expanded a little bit on that. Yeah, there we go. Roman build ships based on Carthaginian blueprints. They're specifically talking about the Quinque Remis. So basically a bigger and more potent, more powerful ship as compared to the triremes, which only had 3 oars, I think they're pronounced in English, and those had been in use since the 7th century BC, and they're still in use during these wars. But then again, the Carthaginians were using a sort of ship that had 5 oars, and it was bigger and you could get more men onto it, and so the Romans copied it and basically retro-engineered it from a Carthaginian wreck that they used as a blueprint. Just wanted to expand on that because it's a fascinating tale, and also this image is pretty bad for the shields.
Number 2, though, they also displayed true grit in that they would never give in. The Romans would go into a conflict, they knew what they had to do to win the war, and even if they kept losing battle after battle after battle, they came back until they won the war, which they did, of course, in the Second Punic War, which broke the back of Carthaginian power in the Western Mediterranean, Hannibal's final defeat, to die drunk in Anatolia. So the 2 things to take out from this are, number 1, the Roman Republic was very good at learning from its mistakes in battle.
Very resilient.
And number 2, it never gave in.
I'm not a huge fan of how History Hits editor is actually adding all of these like little sound effects. I don't particularly like them, but then again, they're very successful. So please don't listen to me. I'm just saying I'm not a huge fan. Want to know what you guys think.
And that made them the most dangerous opponents anybody could face in this period, anywhere in their world.
Yep, I agree.
Did the Roman Republic fight against elephants?
Zama.
Absolutely.
Among
So the
other.
Roman Republic fought a number of conflicts against opponents who used war elephants. So these are elephants who are trained for conflict and combat. It's very difficult to do, by the way, because elephants are very bright animals. And to make them battle hardened meant that they had to be really, really, really well trained, because it seriously goes against the nature of the elephant. And very often the elephant turns out to be a bigger danger to their own side if they panic in battle than to their opponents. So the Romans themselves, although occasionally they used elephants, didn't make them a core component of their military capability.
Unpredictable.
However, Pyrrhus of Epirus, who was a Hellenistic ruler from modern Albania, he brought war elephants to fight the Romans in the Pyrrhic Wars. The Romans certainly fought against elephants when they were fighting the Carthaginian Wars and the Punic Wars, because the Carthaginians used elephants, and also the Numidians, who were allies of Carthaginians and later of Caesar's Optimates opponents during Caesar's civil wars when he fought in North Africa. They also used elephants. Caesar, one of the greatest military commanders of all time, and I would argue, and it's a very, very contentious argument, that actually he was the greatest military leader in the ancient world, even in my opinion, greater than Alexander the Great. Could have used war elephants, chose not to.
Interesting. Would I consider Caesar superior as a military commander to Alexander the Great? That's a difficult one. I'm a massive Rome fanboy, but Alexander the Great is Alexander the Great.
Because he didn't trust them. How did Caesar get his name? So Caesar had the classic trinomen of a Roman senator, of a real top-end patrician with 3 names. Gaius, which was his first name, Julius, which was his clan name, and then finally Caesar, the cognomen, which is effectively a nickname. And you tend to find the eldest son in a Roman aristocratic family has the same name as the father. So Caesar was the eldest son, so had the same name as his father, and so on, going all the way back through to the Second Punic War. So that's when Caesar first appears. One theory is this, that Caesar's forebear, Gaius Julius Caesar, fighting against Hannibal's elephants, allegedly single-handedly killed an elephant at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. It was a big deal, actually. It made him famous in his own world. Now, the Punic Phoenician, the Punic name for elephant is Kaiser. So Caesar is a Latinization of Kaiser.
Very interesting, although then again, when you talk about etymology, he's done nothing wrong. I'm not attacking him at all. It's just that when you discuss etymology, linguistics, that's when I'm expecting to hear pronunciation in language. Because now you hear Caesar derives from Kaiser, the way he is pronouncing it, but is he missing the R because his English accent is non-rhotic? Was I supposed to consider that R, because that would make it very similar? At the end of the day, so the name, just for interest, it's fine to read it in English, absolutely, but just for interest in this case, it's Gaius Julius with the U phonemic vowel length, it's long, Caesar. That's how they read it in classical Latin pronunciation. Caesar would be modern English adaptation, which is absolutely fine. And then Caesar is how we would pronounce it in ecclesiastical Latin, which of course would not be period accurate. So you can tell there is a lot more of a similarity to this. So the etymology would check out a lot more when you read it in classical Latin, Caesar. Still, I wish it gave us a little extra on the Phoenician.
So what we're saying potentially is Gaius Julius Elephant. The real beauty there is that the word Caesar in our world has, in the past 200 years, been used as a name for a ruler. So you have the Tsar in Russia or the Balkans. Of course, in Imperial Germany, you had the Kaiser.
Yep.
So
this one, I get asked this a lot on the channel, so I think it's a great opportunity for me to address it. I doubt it will. People ask me, so is the German word Kaiser the same as, or the same pronunciation as the classical Latin pronunciation for the name in Latin? And they are very similar. They are not the same. I'll tell you exactly, precisely what the differences are. But definitely it was an adaptation in the sense that it is a further proof of the fact that the C in the classical period was always pronounced pretty much like a K and not like a Ch, particularly when followed by certain sounds like E and E, which is a characteristic of a much more modern ecclesiastical Latin, which is an Italianate form of pronunciation. Now, what are the differences? Well, this is pronounced Kaiser. Please correct me if you're German speaking. But the Latin name, even though it's very similar, would be Caesar. Caesar. So the S is a S sound, so not vocalized into a Z. That's the first thing. Secondly, of course, the R is fully trilled and pronounced. R. And instead of I, which would have been a characteristic of a pronunciation of the diphthong in archaic Latin, but by the time we reach classical Latin, which is a Latin spoken both during the Republic, end of the Republic, first few centuries of the Empire, then it's kind of a 600 years, 300 BC, 300 AD, we could say, then the I had already evolved into a I, rather than I. So if you were to sort of divide these vowels with English equivalents, A as in cat, I guess, although then again it depends on the accent you have, and E as in red, Caesar.
Kaiser to Caesar to Kaiser. So Kaiser William II potentially might mean Elephant William II.
Would have been lost by then, of course, if that's
Was
correct.
Spartacus a real person?
Yes.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
No, I'm Spartacus.
Cool.
No, I'm Spartacus.
That's fun.
Spartacus was a real person, so actually I think it's a fantastic movie for a start, and as entertainment it's brilliant. Spartacus led the Third Servile Revolt. Remember, at the bottom of Roman society you have slaves. Depending on where you are in the empire, the ratio differs. So in Italy, for example, in some places it could be 1 in 3 people being slaves. That's a lot of individuals you have to keep down at the bottom of society at the point of the sword. In other places it could be 1 in 10 like Egypt, but in Rome, in Italy, it could be up to 1 in 3. That's quite dangerous actually. So the Romans were terrified of slave revolts, and in the first century,
I wouldn't say terrified, but yes, slave revolts were a thing. There is the one in Sicily as well, but really not all slave revolts were made equal. The one with Spartacus was particularly problematic because they were gladiators, so they were combat trained. But other slave revolts, yeah, there was the one in Sicily where the guy crowned himself king, but they were crushed. I wouldn't say the Romans were terrified. I would say that the one led by Spartacus was particularly problematic and complicated and efficient because of their martial prowess. I mean, imagine a revolt of MMA fighters. You know.
BC they had a couple, and the key one was the Spartan slave revolt, the third one. The most important thing actually about the Spartan slave revolt, the Third Servile War, was the key figures in the Roman Republic who were engaged with it. So you get the first mentions in many places of Julius Caesar as a young man. Crassus, of course, is the figure played by Laurence Olivier in the movie Spartacus as the big leader. This is Crassus becoming the sort of the big man of Rome, etc., and lots of people in between as well. So Spartacus was real. The movie's a great prism simply because it gives you this flavour, a very good flavour actually, of very late Republican Rome and the machinations in the Senate between the Optimates and the Populares.
Yep.
Next question. How did elections work in the Roman Republic?
Very
Well,
good
the Romans
question.
themselves would say within the Republic that they were democratic. Of course, they weren't democratic because only a certain number of people could vote, the rich people. Increasingly,
Sure, yeah, it's a form. There are many multiple forms of democracy. I also think he needs a drink because by the way he speaks, I think he needs a drink.
the Republic went on, though, more and more people actually argue the case that they should be allowed to vote, and more of the plebeians were allowed to vote. So ultimately, elections were pretty similar to the elections that we have today, where it was basically one person, one vote, just with the pool of people voting increasing over time. One of the really beautiful things that we also find in the archaeological record, in this case in the Roman built environment, is actually evidence of the democratic process taking place in the Roman Republic and Empire, but the Republic as well. So when people were standing for office all the way through Roman society, whether it's at the very top as consul or all the way down, you find evidence on walls in built-up areas of people actually advertising themselves as the candidate. So effectively the equivalent of a modern day political poster saying, vote for me. So
That is very interesting. Just for a moment, I had a little bit of a situation because I saw an Italian word here, Via dell'Abbondanza. So we could say Abundance Street, pretty much that's what it means, Via dell'Abbondanza. And for a moment I was like, wait, well, why is it in Italian? And then it's because, yeah.
advertising themselves as the candidate. So effectively the equivalent of a modern day political poster saying, vote for me. So it's all there for us to go and see, actually. And that's what I love about the whole thing about Roman democracy, that you can see threads which pull all the way through back from the Roman world to the world in which we live in today.
Vota Garibaldi, though, is not Roman. Electoral writing, 1948, that's why. Okay, for a moment I was like, what's going on?
Day. How did Julius Caesar come to power? It's a great question. Caesar was effectively, despite coming from the senatorial class, given how far he came in life, he was a self-made man. He had this innate sense of self-belief that he was going to make it. And you can almost look at any stage of his career that he's picked out a route along what's called the cursus honorum, the career path of a Roman senator, from a young man to becoming a consul if they're that fortunate.
You know, this is nice. The whole idea of, look, he had this feeling that he would have made it. It would be great if he didn't get assassinated at the end. That's just a little bit of a, you know, it kind of kills it. It kind of kills the moment, the momentum that we had generated with this introduction, but it is what it is.
See Caesar picking and choosing the roles along that path to actually maximise his ability to be the big man, as it were. Caesar, above all, was the leading late Republican warlord. So these are individuals at the very top of Roman society who've got a big enough following and enough money, Caesar borrowed all his money by the way, to create their own legions and then fight their own battles and ultimately fight their way to power. And for Caesar, he was really helped here. The reason why he was the greatest of them is because he was fantastic at military strategy and also tactics, and personally very brave as well. So when he
And he was brutal and ruthless. Two adjectives that should be added because he was. And that was also part of his success. I'm not saying that to judge him from a modern standard, I never do that, but it is a way to describe him that is absolutely period correct. You didn't mess with Julius Caesar, and if you did, your entire village will pay for it in a very, very violent way.
needed to, he'd actually fight on the front line. The thing which gave him the springboard to become the senior figure in Rome actually was his conquest of Gaul between 58 and 52 BC, which included his two incursions into Britain in 55 and 54 BC, because that basically made him the most important Roman in terms of their achievements in his world. Got the backup of all his Optimates opponents, spun him through into the civil wars against the Optimates led by Pompei. Battle of Pharsalus, Pompey's defeated, goes to Egypt, gets beheaded on landing in Egypt. And then
He thought they were going to spare him. Yeah, good luck with that.
Caesar fights campaigns in North Africa and then in Spain, and ultimately by 45 BC, back in Rome, dictator, declares himself dictator for life, assassinated in 44 BC. So basically, how did Julius Caesar come to power? The actual answer is at the point of the sword.
Yes, he was a very successful military general, but also I would say because of the support from his troops. At the end of the day, a lot of these like republican generals that are very, very successful and powerful, much of that power is built with the loyalty of their men, because a lot of these Roman legionaries, they were a lot more loyal to the general that fought alongside them and that gave them rewards, gave them parts of the loot, that made them richer, that made them successful because of his strategies, kept them safe. They were a lot more loyal to the general than some politician that they don't even know somewhere in the Senate in Rome, which was a very perceived as a threat from senatorial authorities, of course.
Was Julius Caesar better than Pompey? Yes. Next, only joking.
It's funny.
But the answer is yes. Julius Caesar was better than Pompey because, in my opinion, he was a better military leader, both at a strategic level, at a tactical level, and at a personal bravery level. And ultimately, actually, the real reason why Caesar actually was able to get his shot at power was because when he returned to Rome after his conquest of Gaul, having been told not to bring troops with him, but he brought troops with him, Pompey could have stayed in Rome, actually, arguably could have stayed in Rome and found some way of countering Caesar's arrival, but he didn't. He chose to leave, and that gave Caesar the field, the battle space, as it were, in Rome, to play within Rome, and therefore he could begin his bid for power. And from that point, Pompey, until he loses the Battle of Pharsalus, is always playing catch-up. And next question is, what were the optimates and populares? Well, actually,
What a question.
that's a really, really important question if you want to understand the whole dynamic of the Roman Republic, and especially how the Roman Republic came to an end. So these are the two main political parties, classes at the very top end of Roman society. So the optimates were the pro-Senate party, they were the reactionary party, and the populares were the radical party. And you can look at various key leaders throughout Roman Republican history and actually thread them through each of these particular parties as leaders or key figures. So, for example, Sulla was a leading optimate, and Pompey, the great Pompey Magnus, was also leading optimates, whereas Julius Caesar or Marius were leading populares. This becomes very important in the 1st century BC because this is when you have a series of very, very bloody civil wars taking place, where you effectively have warlords, Republican leaders, senatorial class leaders who are warlords because they can raise their own legions and then fight battles on behalf of the optimates or populares. Think about the Battle of Pharsalus between Julius Caesar and Pompey as an example. So optimates were the reactionaries, populares were the radicals.
Yeah, I think you did a good job with explaining this one. I very, very much appreciated that. It would be nice to make a chart of all the important leaders and generals. He likes the word warlord. It's fine. But yeah, the generals, the legati.
Why did the Roman Republic end? The Roman Republic effectively died a natural death, really, because in the 1st century BC, you have this endless cycle of civil wars where you have these leading Roman leaders, I call them warlords, with their own armies, fighting each other for power, and sometimes the optimates winning, sometimes the populares winning. But it spirals and spirals and spirals, and then you have Caesar assassinated, and then ultimately you have the final standoff between the last people standing, who is Caesar's deputy Mark Antony and Cleopatra, against Octavian, who fight the Battle of Actium, and after the Battle of Actium, the only person left standing as a successful military leader is Octavian, and by 27 BC, the Senate has acknowledged that he's brought a degree of stability which the Roman world now quite likes, and so he's basically declared, you're the boss, effectively an emperor, and the Roman Empire comes into being. So the Roman Republic effectively dies a natural death. Why did Julius Caesar change the calendar? Why did Julius Caesar change the calendar? Well, the calendar in use in the Roman world, to the point when Caesar became the leading figure in the Roman world, was out of sync with the lunar calendar, effectively. That's basically the answer. And Caesar therefore decided that he'd reform things. In actual fact, that's no surprise, because Julius Caesar was one of these highly ambitious individuals. If you gave him the opportunity to actually make his name doing anything...
That's very true. I mean, at the end of the day, July from Julius and August from Augustus.
Then he'd do it. So he'd give him the opportunity to change the calendar, which actually is going to change the lives of everybody in their known world. It's a big deal and he loves it. So actually the real reason is for two reasons. One, a practical reason, brings everything much more into sync, not totally by the way, but much more into sync with the lunar calendar. And then finally, of course, by adding additional months, Caesar's able to make his own name as well. It's the PR.
It's the PR. It
Why
is.
was Julius Caesar assassinated?
For that
Julius
PR.
Caesar was assassinated because he effectively, by his actions, made it clear that he had contempt for many of the senior members in the Roman world, whether it's the Senate or equestrians or others.
Gens.
Declared himself dictator for life.
Gentes.
The Roman Republic, through to its very
The reason why declaring yourself dictator for life was problematic, let me kind of add a little bit of substance to that statement, is because a dictator wasn't for life before, in the sense that it was a important role that after a certain amount of time, certain amount of years would stop and you have to have someone else. It's very similar to give you a perspective, modern perspective, how American presidency, you can only be president for 4 years, and then there is the maximum of 8 years. Imagine if an elected president said, no, we're going to abolish that, I'm just going to be president of America for life. A lot of people wouldn't like that, and particularly his political opponents. And pretty much that's what it is.
core, until this point, absolutely loathed the idea of having another king. Caesar was effectively, by declaring himself a dictator for life, becoming a king. And they absolutely hated it. And so you end up with a plot to assassinate Caesar on the Ides of March in 44 BC. And
I think, in fact, the fact that he called himself dictator for life was bad PR in that case. And you know who had much better PR? Octavianus, because he didn't use that. He was the first citizen, princeps, but better PR. Just like Subway has better PR than Jersey Mike's, since they call their white bread Italian. Jersey Mike's is better though.
he was assassinated because he had the audacity to be the biggest man in Roman Republican history. But the key thing is this: his death then initiated the series of events which then brought the Republican Roman world to its end in 27 BC.
For more lessons, check out the channel Polymathy.
Was the Roman Republic ever restored? Only in Russell Crowe's head at the end of the movie Gladiator,
Yeah.
when most of the viewing public who don't know anything about Roman history would have assumed that Derek Jacobi had become a new consul and the Roman Republic had been restored. Absolute rubbish.
Yeah.
Apologies to Russell Crowe, huge fan, love the movie Gladiator, but
Yeah.
the Roman Republic was never restored. If you're a Roman emperor, you're the most powerful person in your entire world.
Yeah.
With all the power and wealth and anything else you want that goes with it. Why on earth would you give it up? So no Roman emperor gave up their power in that way. The Roman Republic was never restored.
Was it ever close to being restored? Ever?
No,
No, right.
no, not really.
No.
And on that bombshell, I really hope that you've enjoyed me answering some
Yeah,
of these questions from Google, the most popular questions on the Roman Republic. If you want to see me appear in any more programming dealing with the ancient world, the classical world, the world of Rome, then click on any of these videos on the screen now, and I will see you all very soon.
That's very cool, very cool. So I see here, could you survive as a Roman soldier on Hadrian's Wall? Oh, I'm totally going to react to that one of these days if you think it's a good idea. And then we have top Roman historian, rates famous movie scenes, him again. So yeah, choose between one of these two. Just let me know in the comments and I'll do the one you choose. This one though, just to give a quick answer, I don't think you would survive if you don't wear anything underneath, like no Thoracomachus or Supermalis underneath your armor. Yeah, that's gonna make it a lot harder. Also, these helmets are not fitting. Yeah, I'm out. Bye. Please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much.